Hey everyone, we're going to be starting chapter 13 this week, as we see Jesus move into a different area where he's going to be teaching the people, and he's going to do so with stories. Now, these stories are going to include materials and events, actions that the people at the time would have understood. They would have been familiar with these aspects of the story. But the stories themselves were really designed to contain valuable, although sometimes sort of opaque, information regarding this kingdom that Jesus is going to be building. And by understanding these sometimes blurry stories, people can gain an understanding really of what Jesus was doing and how this new kingdom would function. And sometimes we call these stories parables. Now, to be honest, many of these stories probably were not fully understood by the people standing around or even by Jesus' closest followers. But by putting the stories out, the information could then be passed on from person to person even after his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension back to the Father. Jesus seems to have wanted people to be telling these stories even after he leaves the earth physically. And that way the nuggets of the meaning would continue to spread even for centuries. The Holy Spirit could enlighten people as to the meanings, but Jesus wanted the stories to be out there. And remember, this was very indicative of the Jewish community or even the ancient civilizations as a whole. They historically passed on their culture through stories, and that's what Jesus seems to be doing here. So in chapter 13, we see one of these stories beginning in verse 3. It says, "And he told them many things in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, but since they had no depth of soil, when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. And other seeds fell in good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Now, fortunately, we have the hidden meanings of this story because it's recorded that Jesus explained it to his disciples. So we're going to be looking at the story. We're also going to be looking at Jesus' explanation of the story. Now, the first thing that we see is as we see the sower sowing the seeds. Now, the sower, Jesus tells us, is him. He's the Son of Man. He's the one that will sow the seeds of his new kingdom. That's how the original seeds are going to be sown. Now, we're going to see later on that future seeds are going to come out of our fruit, the fruit that we are bearing as fruit-bearing plants, in using this analogy, this story. Now, we do need to keep in mind how a sower sowed the seeds in those days. They didn't use tractors and equipment like that to plant these seeds in nice, neat little rows. The sower would simply walk around in the field and use what we would call the broadcast method. He would just simply sling the seeds out in front of him as he's walking around. And in doing this, the seeds would just go all over. In verse 18, we see that the seeds that are being sown are the words that Jesus is teaching about the new kingdom. It's the gospel of the kingdom. Now, we see that some of the seeds that were sowed by this broadcast method fell on a beaten down path next to the field. So you can think about this wide open field that the sower is sowing the seeds, and along the edge of the field where people would walk, you have this beaten down dirt path. Well, some of the seeds are going to end up on that beaten down dirt path. And because it's hard and beaten down, the birds would come and land and ate all the seeds. Jesus says in his explanation that this represents people that hear the gospel of the kingdom, but they don't understand it. And the evil one finds a way to remove the information from their minds, from their hearts, so they don't take the time to ponder the meaning of what they're hearing. And in doing so, these people never grasp what God is doing in his plan to redeem humanity. They just simply go about their business, their life, and what they've heard about the kingdom is forgotten. And to be honest with you folks, this is a picture of many people in the world today. Some of the seeds, he says, fell in rocky ground where there's not much soil. This would be a part of the ground where there was a very thin layer of topsoil, but underneath that thin layer of topsoil was basically bedrock. There just wasn't a lot of soil for the plant to put down roots. So Jesus said that seeds would germinate quickly and try to grow, but since there's not much soil, the new plants could not put down good roots. Those roots would not be able to go down into the ground where the moisture could be found all the time, even when the hot temperatures would dry out the topsoil. Therefore, their roots were only found right along the surface of the ground. And then when the sun would dry out that top layer, the new plants would die because they just weren't able to put down deep roots because of just that hard rock right underneath the surface. Jesus said in verse 20 that this is a situation where a person hears the good news of the kingdom and receives it joyfully, but does not grow spiritually and put down those good spiritual roots of understanding. I mean, they have lots of joy. Jesus points out their joy, but their faith is tied to that joy and their emotions and how they feel. And Jesus said that when tribulation comes or persecution arises, when problems start coming into that person's life, and folks, Satan will make sure that every young, immature follower of Jesus has lots of problems. These people, when these problems arise, they fall away. And Jesus says they will wither and die because it was all tied really to just how they feel. They didn't feel very joyful anymore. They didn't have the spiritual growth that ties them to their faith. And there are a lot of new believers that fit into this group. They really never grow spiritually. They stay focused on how they feel all the time. And that can be a very dangerous thing because no one feels good all the time. Problems will arise, and these people tend to lose their focus when they no longer have those good feelings. Next, we see that some seeds fall among thorns and weeds. Jesus says that these thorns grew up and choked the new plants. In verse 22, we can see that this is the person that hears the word of the kingdom. They allow those words to change their life. They even put down spiritual roots so that when the tribulation, the persecution comes, the sun that beats down on their lives, it doesn't cause them to wither away. But these people allow the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of money and riches to get their eyes off of producing good fruit, the fruit that all Jesus's followers are supposed to be producing. They don't die spiritually. They're still followers of Jesus, but they get so caught up in making money and paying their bills and buying the nice homes. They get focused on having the good life, and they forget that as followers of Jesus, we're called to good works for the kingdom. They never find time for ministry and spreading the gospel to the world. And our churches are full of these people. In America, I know especially, the materialistic view of the world has very much crept into the church. Satan keeps believers unproductive by keeping their eyes on material possessions. And the last group are the seeds that fell on the good soil. those seeds sprouted, grew, and produced good fruit. We can see in verse 23, these people accepted the gospel of the kingdom and grew spiritually so that the trials and tribulations did not cause spiritual death. They did not allow the cares of the world and the desire for money and position and power and influence and fame to interfere with their calling to ministry for the kingdom. Instead, they stayed focused on being spiritually fruitful. They carried out God's calling on their lives and dedicated their lives to the good works that God uses to draw people to himself. And because of this, they produced fruit. Now, does everyone produce the same fruit or the same amount of fruit? No, Jesus makes that very clear in the parable that some produced this amount and others produced another amount. But everyone like this does produce fruit. And remember, the new seeds are found in the fruit. So the idea that Jesus seems to be getting across is that these plants, these people that are being fruitful, are dropping their fruit off, spreading the seeds for the kingdom as well. That's how they're being fruitful. They are then putting out new seeds that will then start this process all over again. But those seeds that these fruitful individuals are putting out will fall on the same kind of ground that the original seeds fell on. Some are going to fall on rocky ground. Some are going to fall among thorns and weeds. Some are going to fall on that pacted earth. But some of those seeds are going to fall on good ground, and even more plants, more people will be fruitful and produce even more seeds, and just keep this process going. So what can we learn from this parable? Well, it seems like the first thing that we can learn is what our job is. Our job is to spread the gospel of the kingdom, spread the seeds. We know that much of the information that we produce, as we're producing fruit that contains the seeds, we know that a lot of that information will land on people who are not going to take it seriously. That's the beaten down path. But we're expected to still produce fruit, spread the seeds. We also know that many people may take the good news seriously, but not dig into the scriptures and dig in deep in following Jesus. They're going to focus on their feelings of joy, but when the problems come, they're going to disappear because they're not spiritually grounded in the scriptures. And this really reinforces the need for people to get into the scriptures, to get into the words and study and ground their faith so that when the trials do come, they have the roots to keep their faith alive even when Satan starts to scorch their lives. We also know that some of the seeds from the fruit will produce plants, individuals that accept the truth of the gospel, get into studying the scripture, growing spiritually, but never actually become very fruitful themselves because they're too focused on making money and having the good life. But some of the seed that comes from our fruit will land on good soil and lead to new believers that are going to be fruitful themselves and in turn become seed sowers also. But regardless of how the seed that we sow in our lives turns out, our job is still to be fruitful, keep sowing the seeds through that fruit being our good works, the good news of the kingdom of Jesus. Jesus says that's how the kingdom works. Again, God calls different ones to different parts of the kingdom. We do different things, but ultimately the things that we do are designed to get the good news of the kingdom out into a sinful, dying world that desperately needs to hear about this kingdom that Jesus started. Hey, I hope every one of you have a great upcoming week, and I will see you next time as we look at another parable here in Matthew chapter 13. Bye-bye.